To combat the most recent COVID variants, the FDA again wants the vaccine manufacturers to update the vaccines. Now, most people have COVID and vaccine fatigue and are kind of over it. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So you may have heard the recent news that the FDA is instructing the vaccine manufacturers to once again update the COVID vaccine in order to be in line with the variants that are going around now. Now, you may have remembered that about 6 months ago, back at the turn of the year, that this happened once already. Okay, and so now they're trying to, I guess we're playing catch our tail now to try to get ahead of ourselves, but I don't really know if that's what's going to happen here. But let's talk about it here some more. So, as you know, I come here to present health, education, and choices to the listener. I provide this information based upon my review of medical literature, plus me putting it into a brain that's been doing clinical treatments for people and have been contemplating things like vaccines for many, many years, 25 years now. So, it gives me an opportunity to kind of take a step back and to look at things to try to figure out and help a family or a person figure out what's best for the individual that we're talking about. Now, again, this should not be, really taken as a personal medical advice, because, again, that's only something that I do for my patients in a consultation. Okay, so now let's talk about the new variants. Okay, so BA4 and BA5, those were the Omicron variants that we were put into the vaccine back in January. Okay, the new one is called XXB.1.5 or XXB15. Okay, and this also is a sub-variant of Omicron. And now, currently, as of right now, 40% of SARS-CoV-2 viruses in America are this XBB15. Okay, but we have no idea how things will be in a couple months from now. As we head into the fall, into the winter, things do change. We have no idea if that's going to be the proper thing. And, realistically, the CDC, as you probably know, for flu vaccines, they try to update it every year. They base upon the data. They try to guess. Sometimes they get it very good in terms of the match for what's going around. And sometimes they get it's a terrible match where it may be only covering 15, 20% of the influenza that is out there. And of course, that is what some people bring to question that I get asked about is, does it make sense to take a vaccine if it may not be very successful? And again, that's part of the back and forth, the informed consent that should be happening, this type of consideration when making these types of medical decisions. Same thing here. Okay. Now, only 17% though of Americans have gotten this BA5, BA4 vaccine that was brought in 6 months ago. So less than 5 people actually took it in the first place. Okay. And again, they say that this new one is supposed to be available in a couple of months. And it's supposed to be providing protection for those older ones and other, but now there's already a BXX16 that's out there. So of course it is known that the antibody levels will go up for a period of time after a vaccine, although there's really a lot of conversation. I've heard 7 weeks, 9 weeks, a few months, but all the information that we have is that it does not provide protection for a long period of time in terms of not causing symptoms. In fact, we even know soon after a vaccine is given for COVID, it may not protect completely against any disease or the ability to pass it along to people. The one thing, though, that the vaccine has been shown to accomplish is decrease the likelihood of severity of disease, hospitalizations, deaths. Okay. Now, part of the issue now is that if, 96% of Americans actually have protection already in their bloodstream, antibodies, whether it was from a past vaccine, whether it was from the wild disease in any of the variants we've talked about, or a combination. Okay, so of course that means 96% of people do have some level of protection. Now, let's go back here a little bit and talk about informed consent, right? This is something I bring up from time to time, that consenting just means I'm giving permission for you to jab that into my body. Okay, informed consent means that you are doing the research ahead of time, that you are speaking with people that you trust, healthcare providers or otherwise, to decide whether the benefit outweighs the risk or not for that individual. Okay. And we've talked so often about the age of the individual. Younger people don't seem to have a problem, although young adults seem to be the ones who have the most problems with the vaccine. The myocarditis, the pericarditis, no longer a controversial thing to say. Of course, that's kind of a common knowledge thing among medical authorities as well. But of course, the pro versus con takes into account, like, how is somebody immunologically intact? In my opinion, do they have good vitamin D and zinc levels, which I think has a very protective effect, as the research has also shown, although not nearly as publicized as the research that has been done about the vaccines. But there are other ways of having immunity, and the immunity, again, mentioned 96% of people do have circulating antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. Okay, and therefore have some level of protection. Now, a few other pieces of information, because again, how much benefit will a person get? Now, of course, there were days a couple years ago where people, especially, actually 3 years ago now, wow, where there were 10,000 people dying of COVID a day. Okay, and of course, that was part of the fear that everybody was having at the time, because that's a lot of people dying in just a week, in just a day. Right? Now, at this point in time, in June, middle of June 2023, approximately 100 people a day are dying from complications of COVID. That's still a number, right? I guess if you say 100, that's still 36,000 people a year, which about averages how many people die from the flu. So again, it's not a small number, but it is a much, much smaller number. Right. And of course, nowadays we have both, whether it's the immune support protocol that we put forth, the COVID protocol for the natural, whether it's Paxlovid that's available. There are treatments out there to help fight the virus that, of course, were not there. Of course, our immune system protocol was, but weren't necessarily there to the population, to the masses, when the vaccine first came out. And of course, that's part of the risk versus benefit conversation as well. All right. So, that is, but again, because of all of this immunity that 96% of people that's probably the reason why there are such few hospitalizations and deaths happening now compared to in the past. Okay. But for any one individual, we don't know if, we still don't know, does an antibody level need to be above X in order to stop you from getting no sickness, or above Y to stop you from being hospitalized? That stuff hasn't been worked out. And I really haven't seen much research that explains that at all. Kind of seems to have a little bit gone by the wayside, and maybe just the medical society's moved on a bit as well, now that the pandemic has been officially declared over for a while, and we are in the endemic mode. So for those who don't recall, endemic means it's always going to be around. It's going to be around for a long time, but not in a pandemic way where it will be overwhelming the medical staff, hospitals, etc. But it doesn't mean that it's still for one particular person, that it can't overtake you or your family or your loved one or your senior elder family members, etc. Because there is some possibility that, much smaller, we know that Omicrons are weaker overall, but we know it can still happen because it is still 100 people a day. Alrighty, so now with my final take, we're in this post-pandemic, this more endemic world. We have to kind of take that into consideration. The likelihood that someone's going to pass it along to us is less likely, although it's still there. Okay. Now, we are perpetually scarred as a society. I get that. Whether one is in the pro or the anti-vaccine crowd, we're all still scarred. We were scarred by lockdowns. We're scarred by, a lot of people scarred by masks. They had their purpose. Now it's questionable how, of course, now it's no longer felt that it is needed. Mistakes were made along the way. Presumptions were made along the way. Of course, nobody could be 100% perfect without a working crystal ball. I know mine broke a long time ago, so I can't use that as a resource. But nonetheless, it still comes back to how are we going to decide? So again, I don't tell you what you should do. You should do what's in your best interest. There's no mandate. There's no force being done about this. This is just a personal decision that every individual can take and has to take to decide what they are or not going to do. All right? Have a great day.